On their 5th wedding anniversary, the main character returned home late from work, expecting a quiet evening, maybe some casual conversation, nothing extraordinary. As he opened the door, he immediately sensed tension in the air. The house was dimly lit, with a single candle flickering on the table where Emma sat alone, her expression cold, arms crossed tightly over her chest. The anniversary that was supposed to be a joyful reminder of their shared life felt ominous. As he stepped closer, Emma's gaze followed him, her eyes narrowing with a simmering resentment he hadn't fully seen before. He took a seat across from her, beginning with a tentative, happy anniversary, but Emma didn't respond. She took a deep breath and launched into her grievances with a quiet, seething fury. Her words hit hard, filled with pent-up frustration from years of feeling overlooked and unappreciated. "You don't even notice us anymore," she began, her voice trembling but forceful. "It's as if I don't even exist, and it's certainly like our marriage doesn't matter to you." Her words tore through the room. He tried to defend himself, stumbling over his own explanations about work and responsibility, but Emma wasn't interested in excuses. She went on, her voice growing louder as she recounted the years of missed dates, forgotten moments, and his general absence. "I wanted a husband," she continued, "not a ghost who drifts in and out of our lives without really being here." He looked away, hoping to avoid her piercing stare, but it was futile. Emma's frustrations spilled out in a torrent, every complaint sharper than the last. "You're so distant, so caught up in your job, your projects, your endless meetings. Do you even remember what it feels like to come home to someone? Do you know how it feels to be married to someone who makes you feel like an afterthought?" At this, he tried to reach out, but Emma pulled back as if his touch might dissolve her remaining sense of self. Her words became desperate, revealing a level of hurt that even he hadn't expected. "Our family was supposed to be important to you," she said, a catch in her voice. "Do you know how many times I've had to pretend we're happy in front of others, lie to myself, even? And for what? Another night spent alone, waiting for you?" A chill swept through him as he sat there, stunned, realizing just how deeply Emma's resentment had grown. He hadn't truly seen it before, or maybe he had ignored the signs, assuming their marriage would somehow survive on its own. For the first time, he could see her pain, how she had silently endured his absence, putting on a brave face to protect what was left of their crumbling marriage. As he searched for words, Emma continued, now with tears brimming in her eyes. "I've tried to be understanding," she said, her voice softer but no less filled with pain. "I've tried to support you, to be there. But it feels like I'm alone in this. I'm the one who takes care of everything here, who tries to make this house feel like a home, who tries to give our family something to hold on to. I wanted us to share that, to be partners, but it feels like I'm carrying all of this alone." She took a shaky breath, struggling to contain her emotions. "Tonight was supposed to be a celebration of our love, but I don't even know if there's anything left to celebrate. I feel like a stranger to you, like I'm fading away, and I don't think I can keep pretending that everything's okay." He finally managed to speak, but his words felt hollow, inadequate against the depth of her pain. "Emma, I know I've been distant. I know I've been working too much, but it's for us, for our future." But Emma shook her head, her expression a mixture of sadness and frustration. "No, it's for you. You've used us as an excuse to justify your absence, but it's not for us. I don't even know what you're working toward anymore, because it doesn't feel like it includes me. It's like you're running away from us, from me." She stood up, the candlelight casting long shadows across her face as she looked down at him, her shoulders tense. "I can't keep doing this," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I can't keep holding on to a marriage that's become so one-sided. I've been fighting for us alone, and I don't even know if you want to be here." With that, she left the room, leaving him alone in the dim light, the silence heavy with her absence. He sat there, grappling with a flood of emotions, guilt, regret, and the stark realization of how much he had taken Emma and their life together for granted. The weight of her words hung in the air, and he knew that he could no longer ignore the issues between them. This wasn't just another argument. This was a turning point, a moment that would either lead to their reconciliation or drive an irrevocable wedge between them. Emma's parting words echoed in his mind as he sat in the empty room, left with the choice to either change or watch his marriage slip away forever. It began as a subtle, gnawing feeling he couldn't quite shake. After their anniversary fight, he noticed Emma acting differently, her phone never far from her reach, her gaze darting away whenever he glanced in her direction. The tension in their marriage had grown after that night, and now a new unease settled over him. One evening, as he was about to head to bed, he noticed Emma's phone on the kitchen counter, left unlocked and screen still bright. Against his better judgment, he reached for it, his hand hesitating as he convinced himself he had no right. But curiosity and the growing sense of betrayal won over, and he opened her messages. His heart froze when he saw Luke's name at the top of her recent contacts. Luke, his best friend since college, the man he trusted with everything, even the difficult secrets of his marriage. But here, in the dim glow of Emma's phone screen, was an entirely different side of that friendship. Their texts were coded, filled with inside jokes he couldn't understand and images of places they'd been together that he didn't know about. His pulse quickened as he scrolled, feeling a sense of dread he'd never experienced before. Words like escape and freedom littered their conversations, hints at something intimate, something he was clearly not a part of. Determined to stay composed, he decided not to confront her immediately. Instead, he began watching, his eyes sharper, his presence quieter, as he observed Emma's every move. And she had no idea. As the days passed, he started piecing together her actions. The evenings she claimed she was meeting friends, the odd times she'd text him that she'd be home late from a non-existent yoga class, her constant checking of her phone. Then came the night he saw Luke's car parked down the street. He had returned home early from work, and as he walked up the driveway, he noticed a car idling several houses down. He recognized it instantly as Luke's. His heart raced, stomach churning as he realized what he was witnessing. And still, he did nothing. He didn't confront her. He wanted proof. Proof that would explain the unfathomable betrayal he was already beginning to understand but not fully accept. Over the next week, he combed through any evidence he could find, and it was there, scattered everywhere he looked. Restaurant receipts for 2, vague photos on Emma's phone where he could spot Luke's hand, unmistakable from the watch he always wore. Once, he caught her holding her phone a little too close, smiling in a way that sent a chill down his spine, a smile he hadn't seen her give him in years. It was then he knew, she was smiling at a message from Luke. Finally, he decided he couldn't endure it any longer. He followed her one evening when she said she was heading to the gym. She pulled up to a secluded park on the outskirts of town, a place he recognized only because he and Luke used to come here to unwind. He parked his car a few streets away and walked up, keeping his distance, his heart pounding so loudly he could barely think. There, near the trees at the park's edge, he saw them. Emma and Luke, standing too close, their bodies angled toward one another. Luke reached out and brushed a strand of hair behind her ear, his fingers lingering a moment too long. Emma laughed, that soft, warm sound he used to live for, and placed her hand on his chest. He felt his stomach twist as they leaned closer, the space between them dissolving into a kiss, a slow, intimate betrayal that shattered the last remnants of his hope. He stumbled back, barely able to breathe, every part of him feeling like it had been torn open. He watched them until he couldn't anymore, until the pain became unbearable. Only then did he return to his car, numb and defeated. The confrontation happened the next morning. He sat in the kitchen, waiting for Emma to come down. She was startled to see him there, and he knew it was because she thought he'd left for work. Without preamble, he said, "I know about you and Luke." The shock that crossed her face was unmistakable. She stammered, tried to deny it, but the words wouldn't come. He saw it all in her eyes, the guilt, the shame, and, to his horror, the slightest hint of defiance. "You know what's the worst part?" he said, his voice trembling. "I trusted you, Emma." "And I trusted him." Emma's voice was barely a whisper as she finally admitted, "I didn't plan for this to happen. I was lonely and he was..." Her words felt like salt in the wound, but he let her continue, hoping for some explanation that would make the betrayal less painful. "It started innocently," she said, her eyes cast downward, unwilling to meet his. "I needed someone to talk to, someone who understood. You were always so busy, always so absent." Luke was there when I needed someone. He felt a surge of anger rising, an anger he had never felt before. You needed someone? He's my best friend, Emma. You had to choose him? Emma's silence was an answer in itself. She didn't offer excuses, didn't try to justify what she'd done, and that, in a way, made it worse. It was clear she had made her choice, that she had known exactly what she was doing, and that realization broke him. Then, almost as if the universe had timed it to deepen the wound, his phone rang. It was Luke. The betrayal, now ringing through his phone, felt like the final blow. He took a deep breath and answered, his voice strained as he forced himself to speak. Hey man, Luke's voice sounded normal, oblivious. I was thinking we should catch up soon. The casual tone sent him over the edge. His voice was cold as he replied, We're long past that, Luke. I know everything. There was a long pause on the line, and then a stammered, panicked response. Wait, let me explain. It's not what you think. But he didn't want explanations. He didn't want to hear whatever excuses Luke might invent to ease his guilt. I don't want to hear it. You were my best friend. I trusted you. Without another word, he ended the call and threw the phone across the room, the sound of it shattering against the wall a small satisfaction in an otherwise broken world. Over the following days, he moved through life in a daze, haunted by flashes of the betrayal he'd witnessed. The memory of their kiss in the park, of Emma's whispered confession, of Luke's feigned innocence on the phone, they all replayed in his mind like a tormenting loop. The two people he had trusted most in the world had destroyed him. In the days that followed, he began to question everything. How long had it really been going on? Were there other moments, other times he hadn't noticed? Had he been a fool all along, trusting them blindly while they betrayed him right under his nose? Each question dug deeper, adding to the wounds that seemed impossible to heal. Emma tried to apologize, even begged for forgiveness, but he was far beyond forgiveness. Every time he looked at her, he saw them together, saw her laughing, saw Luke touching her, saw everything he had tried to believe was just a horrible dream. But it was his reality now, a reality shaped by betrayal, by the lies of his wife and his best friend, by the trust that had been irrevocably shattered. His life, his marriage, his friendship, everything he had built over the years, lay in ruins, and he was left with nothing but the ashes of the life he once knew. After the betrayal by Emma and Luke, he was left in ruins, crushed by anger, guilt, and an emptiness he couldn't fill. Days turned into nights with little sleep, his thoughts consumed by scenes he wished he could forget. To the few friends and colleagues who dared ask, he dismissed his state as work stress, but inside he was breaking apart. That was when Lauren entered the picture. Lauren had always been close to Emma, though she'd kept a polite distance from him. But now, her sister's marriage was on the line, and Lauren was the only one who seemed to reach out to him with genuine concern. It started innocently, a text checking in, a message offering to lend an ear, or an occasional dinner invitation under the pretense of clearing his head. Her messages became the one place he found refuge from the suffocating bitterness that had taken over his life. One rainy Friday night, Lauren invited him over for dinner, saying she was worried he hadn't been eating well. Come over. No pressure, she texted. I'll have everything ready. You need a friend right now. He drove over reluctantly, unsure if being around Emma's family was the best idea. But he craved an escape from the solitude, and deep down, Lauren's messages had a warmth that his life sorely lacked. When he arrived, he found her in a cozy sweater, her hair tied up, looking warm and genuinely happy to see him. She led him into her living room, where the faint smell of garlic and wine filled the air, and he could see she'd put thought into every detail of the evening. They started with casual conversation, but as the wine poured and the hours stretched, their talks grew deeper. Lauren was attentive, leaning in with genuine empathy as he shared the pain he felt, the betrayal he was still struggling to process. Her eyes held no judgment, only understanding, and that alone was an intoxicating comfort. At some point, their fingers brushed, an innocent touch but one that lingered a moment too long. His heart pounded, a nervous flutter mixing with the wine in his bloodstream. He pulled his hand back, immediately self-conscious, but Lauren didn't look away. Instead, she leaned closer, her voice softer than before. You didn't deserve this. she said, her gaze unwavering. No one does. He didn't remember how it started, but one moment they were talking and the next, Lauren's hand was on his cheek, her face mere inches away. She hesitated as if giving him a chance to pull back. But he didn't. Perhaps it was the loneliness, the betrayal, or the burning need to feel something other than pain. They kissed, slow and tentative at first, then with a desperate intensity that neither had anticipated. It was as if both of them were grasping for something solid, something real in a world that had crumbled around them. They spent the night together, wrapped in each other's arms, filling the voids left by those who had hurt them. In those hours, he forgot about Emma and Luke, and the pain receded, replaced by a rush of emotions that he'd forgotten he could feel. They lay awake, talking in whispers, stealing glances at each other in the dim light, both unsure of what this meant but unwilling to break the fragile connection they'd created. When morning arrived, reality came crashing back. The harsh light filtering through the windows felt like a slap, and he woke up with a knot in his stomach. He looked over to find Lauren still sleeping peacefully beside him, unaware of the storm raging inside him. He knew what they had done was a mistake, that this would only deepen the chaos already brewing in his life. But before he could dwell on it, Lauren stirred, blinking awake to find him staring at her, his face etched with guilt. "What's wrong?" she whispered, reaching out to touch his arm, but he pulled away, the weight of his actions pressing down on him. This was wrong," he murmured, barely able to meet her eyes. Lauren's face fell, the warmth and comfort of the previous night vanishing in an instant. "Wrong?" she repeated, a mix of hurt and confusion in her voice. She sat up, wrapping the sheet around herself as if trying to shield herself from the inevitable fallout. I shouldn't have done this," he said, the words feeling like acid on his tongue. "It was a mistake. I don't know what I was thinking." Lauren looked away, her face tightening. "So what was I then? A mistake?" Her voice was quiet, but he could hear the bitterness creeping in. He sighed, struggling to find the right words. "It's not about you, Lauren. It's just, everything is already so complicated. I can't make things worse." "Worse?" She laughed, a hollow sound that echoed in the room. "You're the one who was betrayed. Your wife and your best friend, they're the ones who crossed the line, not you. But here I am, suddenly the bad guy because I tried to help you feel a little less alone." He didn't respond, his silence more damning than any words he could have spoken. Lauren's eyes filled with tears, but she quickly wiped them away, anger flaring up to mask her hurt. "Fine," she said, standing up and reaching for her clothes. "If that's how you feel, then maybe it was a mistake. But don't pretend I'm the one complicating your life. That's all on you." She dressed quickly, her movements sharp and angry, and before he could say anything else, she grabbed her purse and left the room, slamming the door behind her. He sat there, numb and alone, realizing that he had only added to the destruction surrounding him. He thought that maybe he could fix things with Emma, confront Luke, and get his life back on track. But now he'd managed to hurt someone else, someone who had only tried to help him. The following days were a mess of avoidance and guilt. Lauren didn't answer his calls, and he couldn't blame her. Meanwhile, Emma sensed something was off but was too wrapped up in her own guilt to ask. The house was filled with unspoken words, and the tension between him and Emma grew thicker with each passing day. When Emma finally confronted him about his distant behavior, he deflected, unable to admit what had happened with Lauren. "You're acting different," Emma said one night, her voice hesitant but probing. "Is there something you're not telling me?" He shook his head, avoiding her gaze. "Just dealing with everything, you know? It's a lot to process." Emma nodded, seemingly satisfied, but he knew that wouldn't last. Eventually, Lauren would speak up, or worse, word would reach Emma in some other way. He lived with the constant fear that his betrayal would be exposed, that Emma would find out about the one night he'd sought comfort from her own sister. But the worst part was the realization that he'd lost Lauren, someone who had shown him compassion when he was at his lowest. He had pushed her away, ruined what little solace he'd found, and now he was left with nothing but the hollow silence of his broken marriage and the bitter taste of regret. As he sat alone in the darkness of his living room, he couldn't escape the feeling that he had crossed a line from which there was no return. The decision to file for divorce did not happen overnight. The weeks following the discovery of Emma's affair with Luke were a blur of arguments, slammed doors, and whispered accusations. The once quiet, safe home now felt like a battleground. Each day began with tension and ended with anger. In the silence between the fights, both of them retreated into separate worlds, divided by a pain that neither could heal. One evening, as they sat at opposite ends of the dining table, he decided to confront her directly, his voice carrying an edge sharpened by nights spent reliving the betrayal. "Why him, Emma? Out of everyone, you had to choose him?" Emma looked down, her face a mix of regret and resentment. "I told you. I was lonely. You were never there." "And look," he listened. "Don't tell me he listened," he shot back, his voice rising. "He was my best friend. I trusted him, I trusted you. And you knew that. You knew it and you both did it anyway." Emma's eyes filled with tears, but her face hardened. "I was there for you, waiting year after year while you made work your priority. I gave everything to this marriage while you gave me the scraps of your time, of your life. I didn't start this thinking I'd end up in an affair. I didn't want any of this." "Oh, really? Because from where I stand, it looks like you wanted exactly this. You wanted excitement, someone new." His words cut through the air, bitter and sharp. "You wanted someone who wasn't your husband?" Emma let out a shaky breath. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I never meant to hurt you like this." But her apology, like the countless others she had offered, felt hollow. "Sorry doesn't fix this, Emma. Sorry doesn't take away the fact that you chose to betray me with the one person I trusted most. Sorry won't save what's left of this, whatever this is." After a long silence, he looked at her, his face tight with resolve. "I think we both know this marriage is over." Emma's face went pale. For a brief moment, it seemed as though she was about to protest, to plead. But the fight had left her, drained by the weeks of tension and accusations. All she could manage was a nod, her hands trembling as she looked down at the table. "You're right," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "It's over." The next morning, he contacted a divorce lawyer, feeling a mix of numbness and relief. The filing process was swift, but the aftermath was anything but simple. They still lived under the same roof, tiptoeing around each other as they divided their lives. Every piece of furniture, every shared memory, became a painful reminder of what they had once been. A few days later, Lauren reached out to him, having heard of the impending divorce. Her voice was calm, steady, but there was an unspoken sadness in her tone. "I wanted to check in, see how you're holding up," she said softly, and though the kindness was genuine, he could feel the distance, the unaddressed tension from their own brief affair adding another layer of pain. He thanked her, but the conversation was brief, strained, and when he hung up, he felt emptier than before. Lauren, the one person he had briefly found solace in, now felt like a stranger. He had pushed her away, and there was no going back. Alone, he was left to face the wreckage of his marriage and the life he once knew. In the days that followed, arguments with Emma became frequent, explosive. They fought about everything from who would keep the house to how they would handle finances. But the worst arguments came when they discussed the affair, each word laced with blame and bitterness. One afternoon, in the middle of yet another heated argument, Emma finally broke down and admitted the full extent of her affair. "Yes, we were together," she said, her voice filled with bitterness and shame. "It was more than just one time. And no, it wasn't a mistake. It happened because I wanted it to happen." Her words stunned him into silence, his anger giving way to a numb disbelief. "So, you're saying you chose him? That all of this was intentional?" Emma's face was tear-streaked, but her voice held a strange defiance. "I didn't plan it, but I didn't stop it either. I needed something and he gave it to me. And yes, maybe I knew it would hurt you. Maybe I wanted it to." Her admission shattered the last of his resolve. He had believed, naively perhaps, that some part of her still cared for him, that maybe this affair was a terrible mistake she had regretted. But her confession left no room for illusions. She had chosen Luke, chosen to betray him, and she had done so knowing exactly what it would do to him. In a cold, almost mechanical tone, he replied, "Then I guess we're exactly where we need to be. I'll make arrangements to move out." The The following days were a blur of logistics and cold exchanges. They divided up their belongings, each item feeling like a battle won or lost. They avoided eye contact, speaking only when absolutely necessary, both eager to erase the last traces of their life together. One evening, as he packed the last of his belongings, he found an old photo album tucked away in a drawer. Flipping through the pages, he saw the early days of their marriage, smiles bright and eyes filled with love and hope. He lingered on a photo of them on their honeymoon, their faces radiant with the excitement of a life they believed would last forever. The contrast between the faces in the photos and the people they had become was almost too much to bear. Emma walked in, stopping when she saw the album in his hands. For a moment, their eyes met, and in the silence, they both felt the weight of all they had lost. She reached out as if to touch the photo, but then pulled back, her hand falling to her side. "We were happy once, weren't we?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. He nodded, unable to find the words. They both stared at the album, a painful reminder of what had been and what would never be again. Finally, he closed it, putting it in a box with the rest of his things. As he turned to leave, Emma's voice stopped him. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice trembling. "I know it doesn't fix anything, but I am. I never wanted it to end like this." He looked at her, seeing the woman he had once loved, now a stranger. "Neither did I," he replied, his voice heavy with sorrow. "But we can't go back." He left that night, feeling a strange mixture of freedom and despair. The house they had shared, the life they had built, was now behind him, a chapter that had ended in betrayal and broken trust. But as he drove away, he felt a glimmer of something he hadn't felt in a long time, the faintest sense of relief. For the first time, he was free from the pain of trying to fix a marriage that was already beyond repair. In the weeks that followed, the legal process continued, but the worst of the emotional battles were behind them. Emma and he barely spoke, only exchanging brief updates through their lawyers. The finality of the divorce loomed, a bittersweet end to a relationship that had once held so much promise. On the day the divorce was finalized, he felt an overwhelming sense of emptiness. There was no celebration, no relief, only a hollow silence where his marriage had once been. The papers were signed, the terms agreed upon, and with a few signatures, their life together officially came to an end. As he left the courthouse, he looked up at the sky, feeling a mix of sadness and liberation. He had lost a great deal. His wife, his best friend, even his own sense of self. But he also knew he had gained something invaluable, a chance to start over, free from the lies and betrayal that had haunted him for so long. The divorce had marked the end of one life, but in the silence that followed, he felt the faint stirrings of a new beginning, one where he could rebuild, piece by painful piece. After the divorce was finalized, his life felt like a blank slate, filled equally with silence and possibility. The emptiness in his apartment was unsettling, the absence of shared memories a bitter reminder of all he had lost. He spent the first few weeks filling his time with work, diving into projects to avoid the echo of solitude. But soon, he realized that even work couldn't fully distract him. He was restless, haunted by a sense of being unmoored, free yet adrift. Then, in the midst of this isolation, Sarah arrived. She was introduced as the new team lead for a major client project. She had a calm presence, a warm yet understated confidence that drew people to her without effort. Sarah had recently relocated for the job and was keen to settle in, finding her footing in a new city just as he was trying to rebuild his life. On her first day, he was assigned to help her get acquainted with the team and the office, and something about her steady, attentive gaze made him feel unexpectedly at ease. Their interactions started as formal, straightforward meetings. Sarah was always focused, often direct, but she had an unusual knack for making people feel comfortable around her. Over time, as they worked on late-night projects and shared coffee breaks, a quiet friendship began to take shape. She noticed things he thought were invisible, the way his gaze drifted when conversations turned to personal topics, the way he seemed uncomfortable around couples or colleagues talking about their families. One evening, as they were preparing a presentation, she looked up from her laptop and casually asked, "Is everything okay with you?" He was taken aback, not expecting the question and even less prepared for the vulnerability it seemed to require. "Yeah, just tired, I guess," he replied, but his voice was hesitant. Sarah didn't push, just nodded thoughtfully. "I get it," she said with a soft smile, and somehow, that gentle understanding felt like a lifeline. He wanted to talk, to tell her about the mess his life had become, but for now, he let the silence between them speak. It wasn't until a few weeks later, during a company dinner, that he found himself confiding in her. The evening had been filled with laughter and stories, but as the crowd began to thin out, he noticed Sarah quietly sipping her wine in a corner, watching him with that same gentle curiosity. He took a seat beside her, and after a pause, he found himself opening up about the divorce, about Emma and Luke, about the devastation that had unraveled his life. Sarah listened without interruption, her gaze steady and compassionate. "I can't imagine what that must have felt like," she said softly when he finished. "I'm sorry you went through that." Her words, simple yet sincere, broke down a wall he hadn't realized he'd built. For the first time since the divorce, he felt a flicker of hope that he could move past it. Their conversations became a regular part of his day, something he looked forward to in the long, silent stretches of his new life. She became the quiet support he hadn't realized he needed. One day, after a particularly long meeting, Sarah suggested they grab dinner together. It was casual, but as they walked to a nearby restaurant, he realized he was looking forward to it in a way he hadn't felt in a long time. They found a cozy booth, and over shared plates of pasta and wine, their conversation drifted into deeper territory. She shared her own struggles with loneliness, her move to a new city, her recent breakup. They connected in a way that was both vulnerable and comforting, both of them finding solace in each other's company. As the months passed, he noticed a change in himself. He started going to the gym again, taking up old hobbies that had once brought him joy. He found himself laughing more, looking forward to small moments of his day. And always, Sarah was there, a steady presence that grounded him, her calm and gentle wisdom helping him find balance. One evening, as they sat on a bench overlooking the city after a work outing, Sarah asked, "Do you think you'll ever trust again?" Her voice was soft, as if she was testing the waters. He took a long breath, thinking about everything he'd been through, the betrayal and the healing. "I don't know," he replied honestly. "But being around you makes me think it's possible." Their eyes met, a quiet understanding passing between them, and for the first time in months, he felt the stirrings of something deeper, a connection he thought he had lost forever. But Sarah didn't push, didn't rush him. She simply smiled, giving him the space to take things at his own pace. In the following weeks, their relationship deepened. They began meeting outside of work, exploring the city together, discovering hidden cafes and old bookstores. Sarah introduced him to her love of photography, and they spent weekends wandering through the city, capturing moments that, he realized, had begun to feel like small pieces of happiness. The first time he invited her to his apartment was an unplanned evening. They had been working late, the office empty and quiet, when he suggested she come over for a drink rather than parting ways. As they sat on his couch, sipping wine and listening to soft music, the atmosphere shifted, becoming something more intimate, something unspoken but deeply understood. Without thinking, he reached out, brushing a strand of hair from her face, his hand lingering just a little too long. Sarah looked at him, her eyes searching his face, and he knew she felt it too, the unspoken connection that had been growing between them. But she didn't move closer, didn't lean in. Instead, she simply placed her hand on his, offering him comfort without expectation. That small, gentle gesture meant more to him than any words could have. It was a reminder that he didn't have to rush, that he was allowed to heal at his own pace. And in that moment, he knew that Sarah was not like anyone else. She was patient, understanding, and she respected the scars he carried. In the months that followed, his life began to take shape again, with Sarah by his side as both friend and confidant. He started redecorating his apartment, making it a place that felt like his own, no longer haunted by the ghosts of his marriage. Each small change, each new piece of furniture, felt like another step forward, a declaration of his newfound independence. By the time his one-year divorce anniversary arrived, he felt like a different person. He had let go of the bitterness, the pain, and even the anger. Sarah's unwavering support had helped him find a peace he never thought possible, and he realized that he was no longer defined by his past. He was ready to move forward, ready to embrace the possibilities that life had to offer. One evening, as they walked through a quiet park, he stopped, turning to Sarah with a newfound clarity in his heart. "I think I'm ready," he said, his voice steady. Sarah looked at him, her smile gentle but hopeful. "For what?" she asked, though he could tell she already knew the answer. "To trust again," he replied, reaching for her hand. The gesture felt natural, as if it had been waiting to happen. And as they stood there, hand in hand, he felt a sense of peace that he hadn't known in years. For the first time since the heartbreak, he looked to the future with hope. Sarah had shown him that he could rebuild, that he could find happiness on his own terms. With her by his side, he felt ready to start this new chapter, free from the pain of his past, and open to whatever lay ahead.